Brennan is a professor of, I have to look at the slide to make sure I get all of them, strategy, economics, ethics, and public policy at Georgetown University. He recently published a book called Markets Without Limits, where he argues that if you can give something away for free, then you can sell it. He makes that ethical argument. He writes for Bleeding Heart Libertarians, and help me thank him for coming.
Thanks very much for having me here. It's always nice to come back to New Orleans. It's my 5th time in New Orleans, and I guess I've come here. Though this time it's not for Mardi Gras, so I guess I won't have quite as much going into that. Alright, so I'm here to talk to you guys today about commodification. And you're a number of economists. I sort of straddle in between philosophy and economics, and sort of playing in both fields. And you're going to like this talk because what I want to do with you today is help you make cases for markets against the kinds of stuff that my philosopher and political theory colleagues come up with. So this will be sort of insulating economics or making morality safe for economics. So there are lots and lots of questions that people have about markets. One question is, well, how much should governments intervene in and control and regulate markets? When we're thinking about background property institutions, like what sorts of legal and property institutions are the best ones to have? How much should the government provide social insurance or welfare to protect people from vicissitudes of the market? What are some of the proper ethical practices within the market? What counts as good business ethics? And these are all fine, wonderful questions, but I'm not going to try to answer them today. I'm going to leave these basically neutral questions. Instead, I want to look at another question which has become very popular in the past few years, which is the question of, well, what sorts of things are properly subject to the market? What sorts of things ought to be for sale or ought not to be for sale? And you see, there's been a lot of discussion about this for a long time. Even Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations says, well, certain kinds of things, if you sell them, it's almost like a kind of public prostitution. So, of course, prostitution itself is bad, but here he's talking about opera singers. He thought when opera singers received money for their singing, that's kind of prostituting opera singing. That's wrong. Here, even Adam Smith thought that, which is an idea that sounds really bizarre and foreign to us today. Right? So there are lots and lots of things that can be for sale you might want to know about. One is, well, maybe you're at your brother's wedding, or your somebody's wedding, and the best man gets up and gives this wonderful, beautiful speech. But then later you learn he didn't actually write it himself. All those wonderful thoughts that were expressed were actually written by a professional speechwriter. Well, some people find that morally questionable or abhorrent. In order to get into a university, one way you can help make it more likely you get in is if you sort of offer one way or another to donate money to the university. Perhaps because you're a legacy, you have a higher chance of being admitted. And I even have a family friend who basically got into Cornell because her dad got in the stadium. Right? You can buy organs, which might be more, you can buy organs in some ways. Some people think that's morally wrong. I think it's morally wrong to buy kidneys and so on. And they want to oppose that and against it. Back in the early 2000s, a number of economists had an idea that we should use what are called information markets to predict terrorist attacks. The idea behind an information market is you place a bet, like talk is cheap, but when you have to place a bet on what you say, then it's not so cheap. So my economist friend Alex Tadrock says, come on to swear here, I don't know what your norms are. Well, this is a technical term, so it's okay. A bet is a tax on bullshit. Right? What it means by that is, if I say things like, Trump is elected, the economy is going to go down the toilet, I can just say that, it's free. If I say to you, here's a bet, how about we do a conditional bet? If Trump is elected, I bet you that the Dow Jones will stay above 10,000 the entire time he's in office. Now suddenly you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you're not likely to mouth off quite as much. And in fact, when you ask people to take bets, they end up making much more accurate predictions than they otherwise would. So some economists said we should use the power of betting to harness information about whether terrorist attacks are going to occur, and then we can save lives with it. This was proposed to Congress, and they legalized this sort of market, allow it, and it got shut down by a number of Congress people, both Republican and Democrat, who said it was abhorrent and disgusting and tried to profit off of death, even though it probably would save lives. So there are lots and lots of books out there on this topic. In recent years, Michael Sandel at Harvard wrote a book called What Money Can't Buy, and luckily for him, he can buy books, so he sold a lot of them. Deborah Sachs at Stanford wrote a book called Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale. Benjamin Barber at, I don't know where he is right now, I think still in Maryland, wrote a book called Consume, How Selling Stuff corrupts children, infantilizes adults, and swallows citizens whole. Elizabeth Anderson in Michigan wrote a book called Value, Ethics, and Economics, an older book called McDonaldization of Society, Roger G. Reagan, a book called Contested Commodities. And the common theme of these books is that markets, they're okay. It's fine to have markets, but the problem with markets is that they're like pigweed or kudzu or something. You put them in one spot and they just spread and take over everything. Next thing you know, everything is for sale and nothing is left sacred. Right? So there's all sorts of objections that philosophers have raised to marketing certain things, putting certain things in the markets. One argument is that selling certain things might violate somebody's rights. So I'm going to go through prostitution for each of these as an example. Well, sometimes if you were to pay for sex with a prostitute, that person has been enslaved. So it violates her rights to have sex with her. She's not really consented to it. Another argument is that selling certain things harms others. You cause harm to other people. So people might say you shouldn't be allowed to buy a gun because you're putting too much of an externality onto others. Or you shouldn't be allowed to buy, other dangerous objects because you might harm others. People claim that you shouldn't be able to sell certain goods because it might exploit someone, take pernicious advantage of this misfortune. So people often claim prostitution is wrong for that reason, because anyone who consents to sell sex is probably being exploited. Other people complain that selling certain things is wrong because it misallocates resources. So Michael Sandel complains at great length about a phenomenon in New York where people are standing in line at free public concerts to get tickets, free tickets, not really free, you should just stand in line, but free tickets, and then selling them on the market. So he says that's wrong because you're misallocating the resources. Before they were available to everybody, but now what happens is only rich people get to go to those concerts or to Shakespeare in the Park. People complain you shouldn't buy and sell certain things like maybe fried chicken because it's bad for you. So you shouldn't be allowed that to do for that reason. Another argument is that, I've spent some time talking about this one, buying and selling certain things might corrupt our character, make us worse people. Maybe if we stop now buying and sell certain goods, we'll become bad. So maybe like buying and selling sex would be a bad thing because then we'll lose the ability to be truly intimate with one another. People make that claim. And finally, there's a really interesting class of objections that I call semiotic objections. I'll spend some time explaining at great length today. But the idea here is that buying and selling some things is wrong because it violates the meaning of that good in some way, or it violates the meaning of the relationship that we have. So these are semiotic or symbolic objections. There's all sorts of objections, and like I do in the book with my co-author, Peter Jaworski, is trying to systematically debunk all these arguments. Well, they don't really work. They don't do the work they need to do. So this is the thesis of the book, Market Without Limits. We want to claim, look, not everybody literally thinks everything can be for sale all the time. Despite that, our thesis, our title is not misleading. Rather, there are things that you shouldn't be allowed to sell, but only because you shouldn't have them in the first place. That's it. That's pretty much it. So our view is, if it's okay to have or use or exchange something for free, then it's okay to have, use, or exchange that thing for money. Right? So the simple thing here is, for this to really be about commodification, the market has to figure in some way into the wrongness of the exchange. So an example of this would be like, you shouldn't have child pornography. Because you shouldn't have child pornography, period, you shouldn't sell it. We're fine with that. I don't think you should have nuclear weapons. So since you shouldn't have nuclear weapons, I don't think the US should have nuclear weapons. It shouldn't sell them to Germany, because Germany shouldn't have them either. So yeah, you can't sell these things, but here the problem is you just can't have it. You shouldn't sell, say, assassination services for innocent people, maybe you assassinate bad people, but innocent people, because you shouldn't just assassinate them in the first place. Right? So these things, the wrongness here isn't about the buying and selling, the wrongness is about the thing itself. Now in contrast, someone like Elizabeth Anderson at Michigan, I mentioned her before, she thinks it's fine for you to say, have one of your friends act as a surrogate and carry a baby for you for free. But if you pay her and she makes a profit off of doing it, well then wrongness has been introduced into the world where there wasn't any before. Michael Sandel thinks it's fine for you to go to Disney World and stand in line to hold a place for your kids, who can then jump in line for you and you go on the ride, but it would be wrong for you to do that and then jump out for $20 at the last minute to sell like your spot in line to somebody for money. Okay? So the people I'm arguing with, they're talking about things where they think it's okay for you to have it, it's okay for you to possess it, to give it away even, but when you do it for money, then suddenly evil has been introduced into the world. All right? Now again, just to illustrate why it's important that it has to be about the market itself, just to show why it would be absurd otherwise. Suppose the following is true. It's immoral to lie, it's immoral to cheat, and it's immoral to steal. It follows from that trivially that it's immoral to lie, cheat, steal while wearing a hat. Right? So if I then decide to write a book called The Moral Limits of Hat Wearing, where I said you can't wear a hat while lying, you can't wear a hat while stealing, you can't wear a hat while cheating, you recognize, wait a minute, the hat really has nothing to do with it. It's sort of incidental. And what we noticed, I'm not going to go through it now, but we noticed when we were writing about this, roughly about half of the cases that the anti-commodification theorists have come up with are covered by this. Where it's like, you're not actually complaining about commodification, you're complaining about stuff people might be doing while commodifying things. So an example of that might be, a lot of people I know wanted to refuse to buy chicken nuggets from Chick-fil-A because they didn't like their stance on civil rights. And so you can't buy chicken nuggets from Chick-fil-A. Well, it's not because of the chicken nuggets, it's because of other stuff. If they were selling drugs, it would be the same problem. So what you don't like is their civil rights stance. It's not about the actual thing being bought and sold. Right. So when we're thinking about this, when I say without limits, there are some limits, but what limits we have in mind? So if you know anything about law and you know free speech rules in the United States, the United States Supreme Court has said that there are time, place, and manner restrictions on speech, but no content restrictions on speech. You can say what you want, right? But your right to say what you want doesn't mean that you can show up in my bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning, bang on the table or something, and then start reciting Slayer lyrics. Right? Your right to free speech doesn't mean that you can go into the middle of like rush hour traffic anytime you want, and then start reading economics textbooks everywhere. Right? So there are some restrictions in your right to free speech, but they're not about the content of what you say. They're about where you say it, or how you say it, or when you say it. So similarly, I think we have a diagnosis of the arguments that philosophers have made. We think their arguments, for the most part, aren't with what's being sold, but the way it's being sold. So a lot of their objections are like that. You can take care of the problem they have with the market by changing the nature of the market. So they're just contingent problems. So for example, think about kidney sales. A lot of philosophers are opposed to kidney sales. So I'm going to talk to you in a minute about why you shouldn't be opposed to them. I think they're great kidney sales. But they're opposed to them. They'll say things like, I'm worried that if we allow people to buy and sell kidneys, then a lot of people will sell them without knowing the risks that are involved. And then they'll give up their kidney too easily, and it'll be horrible. And say, okay, well then, really all you're saying is you're not really in principle opposed to kidney sales. You're opposed to kidney sales when the person doesn't know what they're doing. So you should just be in favor of allowing kidney sales, provided, say, a person passes a test showing they understand the costs and benefits and risks. Sort of like getting a driver's license. Other people say, I'm worried about kidney sales because I think only desperately poor people are going to sell their kidneys and will get taken advantage of. Like, okay, so you're not inherently opposed to kidney sales. It's looking for me to sell my kidney because I'm not desperate. You just are opposed to poor people selling kidneys. So if I had a rule that said you're allowed to sell your kidney provided you make more than $35,000 a year, you'd be fine with it. But they'll say, I'm worried that if you have kidney sales, then only the rich will be able to afford them because the price of kidneys will be too high. Okay, well, when it comes to food, right? If we have food on the market, some people can't afford it. And here I'm talking to my left-leaning colleagues. Like, you don't then respond by saying we should have socialism in food or forbid buying and selling food. You respond by advocating food vouchers, food stamps. So why do I have kidney vouchers? These are all contingent objections to the kidney market, and they can be removed by regulation or some other things. That's not to say I'm in favor of these regulations, but just to say to them, look, at most you're opposed to a completely unregulated free market in these things. You're not opposed to the thing itself. Right? So you think about it, with any kind of market, you can kind of think of it like this. Anyone here play guitar? Chance, a few people. So you will understand what I mean. Guitar amplifiers have a bunch of knobs in front that control different things. The amount of gain, the amount of treble, the amount of bass, the amount of mid-range, the presence, and other stuff. Some guitar amplifiers, such as the Mesa Boogie Mark IV, Mark III, which even if you're not into guitars and you've heard that amplifier thousands of times with thousands of different records, are very what we call touchy. To get it to sound right, you have to have the knobs just right that sound right. Other amplifiers, such as the Marshall Super B, which you've also heard, if whatever music you listen to, you've heard this amplifier thousands of times with thousands of records, are easy. They're easy to dial in. You can have the settings no matter how you want, it'll sound pretty good. Well, some markets are like that too. Some markets one where you can kind of have the settings of the market, who participates, the medium of exchange, the price, the mode of exchange, the mode of payment, the goals that people have when they participate. You can have this set in almost anything and it's a good market. Others are kind of touchy. You have to dial them in just right. But that still doesn't mean that the market is inherently bad. So if you say to me, I'm okay with buying and selling kidneys, but only on May 21st while you say Hail Mary 6 times and dance a jig, you're still in favor of kidney sales. You still think it's permissible in principle, you just think it's permissible under weird circumstances. And so I kind of win. Now, I really start cheaply in that kind of case because it's like, well, the market seems to be bad in most circumstances. But the good news here is the markets that Peter and I look at in the book are ones where it seems like they're permissible under a wide range of circumstances. All right. So here's why this stuff matters. I'm just introducing the thesis. I haven't argued for it yet. Here's why it matters. It's because a lot of people are going to die because we forbid certain markets. So I'll be talking about a lot of mundane markets and silly markets and kind of grotesque markets. We need to understand that something is at stake here. People's lives. So in the United States, lots of people are on a waiting list to get a kidney. Lots of people have extra kidneys. Like, does anyone here have 2 kidneys? All right. So here's something I know about you. You, in this room, are not kind and loving enough to give up a kidney to help a stranger. Right? You might think you should be, but you're not. And you probably, after hearing me say this, you won't do anything about it. Nevertheless, some people are willing to sell a kidney for money. They would be willing to give up on their kidneys if they could profit from it. So that means that there is implicitly a market for kidneys. There's an implicit supply curve. If the price of kidneys went up, some of you would be willing to give them away. Like, so how many of you would sell a kidney for 50 grand? How many for 100 grand? How many for $1 billion? All right, that's your supply curve, right? As the price rises, you're more people enter the market. So similarly, people are willing to buy kidneys, right? If your kid is sick and needs a kidney, you'd be willing to buy one. Like, I would buy kidneys for my kids. Like, if my younger son were dying of a kidney infection and I could get him a kidney that would save his life for my entire life savings, of course I would. I would mortgage the house, right? So people are willing to buy it. So there's a demand curve, right? So that means that there is an implicit market price for kidneys, an implicit equilibrium price that exists right now and regulates how people behave. However, what happens when we've got our supply curve, we've got our demand curve, right? Here's the price, here's the quantity. What's the legal price of kidneys in the United States? 0, right? So here it is. So there's a gap between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. Quantity demanded greatly exceeds quantity supplied. What do we call that? Shortage, right? So that's just basic microeconomics. And so for this reason, many economists are in favor of demand curves. Now there is one country, I'm sorry, in favor of kidney sales. There is one country and demand curves. There's one country in the world that allows kidney sales and organ sales. Anyone know what it is? Yeah.
Singapore?
I don't think so. Maybe you're right. Maybe they do. I'm wrong. Maybe that's the one I have in mind. There's one that I know. All right. It's Iran. And in Iran, right? In Iran, they don't have a waiting list for people who want to give away, who need kidneys. They have a waiting list for people who want to sell kidneys. Here in the United States, though, or in Canada, where my co-author is from, we have a waiting list for people who want kidneys. Most of them will not get a kidney. It's not just some of them. Most will not. So their lives are at stake. And here are the deaths. And we have exits, people who exited without dying, they later died. So a lot is at stake. Nevertheless, a lot of people think that there's something wrong with buying and selling kidneys, and their objections are largely symbolic. So what I'm going to do is show you how you kind of take these objections down. What's wrong with them? And ultimately the answer is going to be, you can put a price on meaning. Meaning is subject to cost-benefit analysis, and it fails. Okay. So here's what I mean. Michael Sandel, there's a picture of him talking to guys. And he says, markets don't only allocate goods, they also express certain attitudes towards the goods being exchanged. And for that reason, buying and selling certain things is wrong. So people say this about sex. So like, the problem with buying and selling sex is that you're expressing the wrong attitude towards sex, so therefore it's wrong. You're not treating it as having the status that it probably has. So he says this about kidneys and a bunch of other things. Elizabeth Anderson says, to preserve our autonomy, for us to be truly free beings in some sort of highfalutin Kantian sense, we need to create and maintain separate spheres of interaction where we can express different modes of valuation. David Archer says, the meaning of non-market exchanges can be contaminated by the existence of market exchanges. So selling certain things like blood contaminate the meaning of the gift relationship. Like usually people give away blood. It has a special meaning of giving. When other people start selling, it contaminates the meaning. Now, since you're an economics club, there's a pretty good chance you don't find these kinds of arguments persuasive. I'm going to make them a little bit better in a moment before I take them down. That's cool. I don't find them persuasive either. The important thing, though, is lots of people do. Most people think that they hear about the economic case for kidney sales and they go, yeah, but it's just wrong. Yeah, you're right. It would save lives, but too bad it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Because the human body is sacred and you don't sell parts of the human body. That's wrong. Well, why do they think that? So Peter and I call these semiotic objections. Semiotic meaning symbolic. Symbolic objections to markets. And the way we define this is as follows. Independently of other objections to markets, something is a semiotic market when you say that to allow the market in some good or service would show disrespect for something, or is incompatible with the intrinsic dignity of something, to show disrespect or irreverence for some practice or custom or belief or behavior with which the thing in question is associated. That's very abstract. I'll give you some examples to make it more clear in a second. The important thing about semiotic objections is that it has to be independent of other objections people have. So, for example, buying and selling slaves does express disrespect for the slaves, but it expresses disrespect because it violates their rights. Buying and selling products from people who are being exploited may express disrespect for the exploited people, but does so because they're being exploited. Buying and selling products that cause great harm to third-party bystanders expresses disrespect, but it's because it harms. The people I'm arguing with today, Michael Sandel, Elizabeth Anderson, David Archard, Richard Titmus, Deborah Satz, and others, they think it expresses expresses disrespect independently. So you could say, imagine I fix the kidney market, so there's no exploitation, there's no harm done to third parties, there's no misallocation of kidneys, all your other objections are gone. They'd say, yeah, it's still wrong because even despite that, it still express disrespect for the human body, for the type of relationship human beings are supposed to have. So these are the reason I'm starting with these is because having read the whole literature on commodification, this is the most common form of objection people have to markets. This is when everyone makes this objection. You have other objections as well, this is the most common one. So here's an example of the kind of arguments that Elizabeth Anderson makes. She says, look, some things are not commodities. Right? So she says to offer certain goods and services for sale shows you regard those things as mere commodities. So therefore, it's wrong to offer them for sale. What does she mean by that? That's what she says. A practice treats something as a commodity, its production, distribution, and enjoyment is governed by one or more norms distinctive of the market. And what she means by these norms is, to put something on the market expresses the following views. You think the thing being bought and sold is merely of instrumental value. It has no value in and of itself. It's merely a tool for your own satisfaction. You think the thing being bought and sold's value simply reduces to the value of the money that it's in exchange for. So you're treating this thing, which might have this high status, as just being interchangeable with money. So people will say things like, you shouldn't be able to buy and sell, sex, because if you sell sex, you're saying that sex is worth, it's just $100, that's all it is. Right? It has no other value. That's what she claims. The problem is she's saying, if you sell that, then you must think that. And that seems kind of obviously false. So for example, how many of you have pets? Right? Did any of you buy your pet? Yeah. Do you think what do you have for a pet?
I shop a lot.
We coordinate this. Now, your dog, do you think your dog, how much did you pay for it?
I think it was like 600 we got her as a baby.
Okay. So do you think your dog is like, yeah, my dog, it's a $600 thing, it's worth, 60 CDs, it has no other value to you whatsoever, you happily exchange your dog right now for another $600.
No.
How do you think of your dog? Which
family. Family.
Yeah. So a lot of people buy and sell pets, and they nevertheless don't have the wrong attitude she says that they have to have. So this is just, it sounds like she's making an empirical claim, and the empirical claim is obviously false. As a matter of fact, people buy and sell certain things all the time and continue to have reverence for it. We actually did some background research. We tried to find out, when people buy pets, is there any evidence that they love their pets less than people that acquire them from other means? And there is some research on that, and the answer is no. All right. Similarly, Albert Barnes collected a huge amount of art and paid a huge amount of money for it. It'd be weird to go up to Alfred Barnes and say, you paid a lot of money for art. You must not think art really has any profound or sublime status. You think of art as being like bubble. And you're like, that's absurd. In fact, the reason he paid so much money for it is because he thought it was so valuable. And I might not get to this point, so I'll bring it up now, because we'll see how far I get to the slides. This interesting sociologist, Vivian Zalazar, wrote a book called Pricing the Priceless Child. And she says the current attitude that we Americans have towards children, which is children have this kind of sacred, priceless status, actually arose as a result of insuring them on insurance markets. So the view that they have such a high value came about as a matter of trying to price them. It wouldn't have existed otherwise. All right. So that argument doesn't work. But there's a better version of that argument that does work. It doesn't work. I think I'm going to debunk it. But it's more plausible. So I'm going to fix up Elizabeth Anderson's argument on her behalf. So I can say, she's saying, look, if you buy and sell something, you must believe that the thing in question is merely fungible with money, has no real intrinsic value. And it's like, well, that's not true. You love your dog, even when you bought it. Right? Alfred Barnes loves art and thinks it's profound, even though you bought it. So a better way of putting the argument is something like this. Buying and selling certain goods tends to express morally deplorable attitudes, attitudes that shouldn't be expressed. And this is true even if you yourself don't have that attitude. You can express something that you shouldn't express even if you don't intend to, even if you don't actually believe it. Right? That's plausible. And if that's the case, if that's right, then commodifying certain objects might be wrong. So the premise here is a plausible one. What you express can be independent of your attitude. So suppose you're taking a vacation to Poland, and you're sitting on a train next to somebody, and you put your leg up like this, and you put the bottom of your foot towards that person. You probably don't mean anything by it, but in that culture, doing that expresses disrespect. Right? So what you can express, as I often find out, because I frequently get in trouble for this, I'll say certain things to my wife, and then she gets mad at me, and I didn't intend to say something mean or dumb or stupid, but I nevertheless did express disrespect for her or for other people. And you might have that problem too, or you don't. Right? What we express is independent of what we need to express to some degree. We can express mean things and bad things even if we don't intend to. So there's right on this. So she can say there's a distinction between treating something as a mere commodity and regarding it as a mere commodity. Where to be a mere commodity means you just think the thing is fungible money and has no real value in itself. Similarly, another related objection that I create on their behalf is the idea that, well, buying and selling certain things corrupts the meaning of certain relationships. So suppose I get home tomorrow, and when I get back, I'm like, I say to my wife, Lauren, if you're there, I'm like, Lauren, what do you say I give you $100 for you to have sex today? How do you think she'd react? You don't know her problem. Right? She wouldn't take that too well, right? Or if I said maybe something less like dramatic, $100 you vacuum, $100 you paint your kids' room or something like that. If I offer her money, a lot of people think there's something weird about that. Like it would violate the meaning of the kind of relationship we have. And so then people say, well, the reason we can't buy and sell certain things among one another is because we have some sort of relationship where buying and selling that thing corrupts that relationship. That's what people say about voting. Like, the reason I can't pay you to vote a certain way is because it corrupts the meaning of the citizenship relation. So that's somewhat plausible on its face, right? So I call this the wrong currency objection. One of the problems with money is that, according to the critics of money, is that money communicates distance and estrangement. Jerry Cohen, the Marxist philosopher, that's his basic problem with markets. He thinks markets are an arm's length relationship where we should be hugging it out instead, right? So there's some relationships between citizens and friends, romantic partners, where it would be wrong to communicate estrangement. Even if you don't intend to communicate, you can. And therefore, using money within those relationships is wrong. And there are a number of cases where people are opposed to commodifying stuff for this reason. All right. Well, but my response to this is to say, how do we put a price on meaning? Why don't we subject codes of meaning to cost-benefit analysis? So the way of putting that is, let's suppose, because we want to talk purely about semiotic objections, let's suppose whatever market we have in question here is a market where no rights are being violated, it doesn't cause any harm, it doesn't misallocate resources, and it doesn't explain anything. So we just want to focus purely on the symbolic stuff that everyone is so interested in this debate. So suppose it turns out that markets and certain goods or services will lead to pretty good outcomes, beneficial outcomes. But suppose, nevertheless, that these markets signal disrespect, and there are no other independent objections to it. Well, then my response to that, as we're going to argue right now, is that we should revise the codes of meaning and the social practices that impute immorality onto these markets. We should just revise what it means, the meaning of the market, rather than change the market itself. So here's what I mean. That's going to sound abstract. I'll give you a bunch of examples, and then it's going to become clear. All right. Here's an example philosophers like to use. The Persian emperor has the Greeks and the Galatians in front of him. Right? He rules over both at this point. And he's interested in the way that they behave. So he says, my people respect their fathers. And one of the things that we do in our cultures, all three cultures, Persian, Galatian, and Greek culture, is when our fathers die, we express respect for them. So he says, but I notice that the Greeks and the Galatians do different things to express respect. I think I'll ask them about it. So he says, hey, Greeks, you respect your fathers, right? Yes, we do. It's very important to us to respect our fathers. Tell me, how do you demonstrate respect for them at a funeral? Well, they say, King Darius, we burn our fathers on a pyre. That's what we do. Pyres signal respect for the dead. The reason they do this is because it's sort of a symbolic way of releasing their souls into the afterlife. If you don't really believe that, that's nevertheless our practice to show respect for them. Okay, would you ever eat your fathers after they die? You say, that idea is abhorrent and disgusting for us. To us, that shows disrespect for the human body and for our fathers. Because when you do that, what you do is you treat your father as mere food. You treat your father as if he's fried chicken. You can't do that. Right? You disrespect your father by eating him. You corrupt the very meaning of a funeral for you to eat your father at a funeral. Okay, collations. You respect your fathers. Tell me, how do you respect your fathers? What do you do to show respect? Oh, we eat them. Right? We eat the hearts of our fathers, and the reason we do that is because it signals respect for the dead. And the reason it signals respect for the dead is because when you eat your father, part of your father remains in you. It continues onward forever. That's why we do that. It's a beautiful notion, actually. I can't see it. Right? Well, would you ever burn your fathers in a pyre? What do you think about burning them on a funeral pyre? That idea is repugnant and repulsive and disgusting to us. We would never burn our fathers. After all, if you burn your fathers, you're treating them as if they're trash. Burning is what you do with trash. It's not what you do with your dead father. You eat your dead father. The very meaning of funerals. Now, what's going on here is, I'm not saying, some of you just go, oh, morality is entirely irrelevant. It's just subjective. I'm not going to say that. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think everyone at the party here, it's going to be a bummer of a party, but everyone at the party agrees you're supposed to express respect for your dead. And that's a culturally invariant notion. Everyone accepts that. But they disagree about what it takes to express respect. In fact, what's happened here is the Greeks and the Galatians have constructed different codes of meaning by which to express respect or disrespect. So there's a truth of the matter about you should express respect, but there's no truth of the matter inherently about what it takes to express respect for the animals. You could have a culture where the thing that you do with your dead is you pop them up like Weekend at Bernie's style, and you have a party. And if you fail to do that, that would be disrespectful. Right? So some of the notions, there's rules about expressing respect, but what it takes to express respect seems to be, in these cases, a social construct, a social convention. And you can change social conventions. So for example, we could agree, you remind me this, let's all agree right now, we're going to change a social convention. So if I were to stick up my middle finger in the rest of America, what would that mean? Disrespect. But how about, is this okay, like everyone can consent to this? We're going to agree right now during this room, like while we're here together, as soon as we leave it's over, what this means is I respect who's in yourself. Right? When I do this, what I'm saying is like, I value you. I think you're a content in yourself. Right? We're just going to make that a new convention. So when I do this to you, what should you do back? Yes, thank you. We could just change the convention. Now, it might be costly to do so. It might not be an easy thing. I'm not saying after we leave, we should go out and be like, hey, everybody, you can't do anything. It's probably not worth doing. But nevertheless, you can see, you can change the convention, and there might be reasons to do so. Right? So I'm going to talk about some reasons. It's arbitrary. It's not arbitrary that we avoid seeming respect for one another, but it is arbitrary how we do so. So unless you're exploiting somebody or violating their rights, it appears merely to be an arbitrary social convention that these things express respect or not. All right? And that means it's open to revision. So we shouldn't take these social constructions for granted. We shouldn't just, well, we happen to think that this is disrespect. We're just going to stick with that. Because there can be costs and benefits to different social conventions that express respect. So for example, suppose we discovered the following. It turns out when I say, go to hell, that causes weird vibrations in the air. And when these vibrations get to your body, they happen to cause vibrations in the molecules in your body that kill cancer cells. No one had ever noticed this before, but it turns out saying to other people, go to hell, actually saves their lives. What would be the right thing to do if we discovered that? What should we do with the English language? Yeah. If we discovered that, the right thing, if we actually care about, if we really fundamentally respect it, if we discovered that saying go to hell saves lives, what we ought to do is make go to hell like an informal greeting. We walk, hey, go to hell, right? We'd be awful people who are like, well, nope, it means something bad. We can't talk that way. We should just change our language. That's the right thing to do. Suppose similarly, if I say to you, I respect you as an end in yourself, as a content bearer of dignity, as a thing that has value but not a price. Dignity, not a price. Sometimes of the concept. Suppose we discover that when you say that, it caused weird vibrations in the air which killed infants across the world. And it doesn't look like, and we use an example we did, but if we discovered that, what would be the right thing to do after discovering that? Yeah, it would be really awful for someone to say that. Like we'd have to revise our language. Now these are absurd cases, but there are real-life cases of this. So the Foray tribe in Papua New Guinea actually had a practice of eating the brains of their dead. Unfortunately, it turns out when you eat the brains of your dead, you get a certain prion-based disease. Prions are these weird little proteins that can be infectious agents, and it causes you to die. Like your brain then lost weight, and you die, and then someone eats your brain, and they die, and it's 100% fatal. They discovered after a while that this was causing this disease. What do you think they did with the practice? They threw it. That's right. They banned it. They said, oh, we would have this social practice which we use to express respect for our dead. We found that it literally was killing us, so we stopped doing it. So similarly, the question is, well, what about organ sales or the policy analysis market? It happens to be in light of certain codes of meaning that Americans have, that they regard organ sales as essentially expressing disrespect for the human body, right? And they want to say, even if you have organ sales where you don't hurt anybody, you don't misallocate organs, no one is exploited, no one's taken advantage of, and everyone who needs one gets one, and you save a bunch of lives, nevertheless, people like Michael Sandel, Elizabeth Anderson, and others are going to say, no, those things are wrong because they express disrespect. And then I say to them, it kind of sounds to me like you're the type of person who'd be with the 4A tribe going, yeah, to keep eating the brains of the dead. Why don't we just change the code of meaning? We could just view that, well, these things are socially contingent. We could change them. Right? Why do we have to regard this as disrespectful? Same thing with the policy analysis market. Why do we have to regard it as disrespectful? So it turns out this is going to be a weird case where sociologists are going to help economists. Usually they're kind of opposed, because economists like markets and sociologists tend to be really left-wing. But when I was doing research on this, I found that sociologists are surprisingly on board with this view. They've done a ton of empirical research showing that almost everything that Americans now think about the meaning of money is merely an artifact of current American culture. It turns out Americans didn't used to think this, and people all around the world don't think this. So they say, like, Mitchell and Nickel summarizing and say, in the conventional, the contemporary Western economic perspective, money is viewed as a utilitarian commodity that's ordinary, mundane, impersonal, neutral. Is profane with only quantitative meanings. And this is the kind of meaning that Sandel and Anderson are relying upon when they say that buying and selling stuff is icky and bad. Right? Instead, though, all around the world, people have different attitudes. So I mentioned before, what if I said to my wife Lauren, like, you know, hey, no, that sex was great, here's $100. She'd be offended. But there are places in the world where you're supposed to do that. So among the Marina people of Madagascar, husbands are supposed to pay their wives after they have sex. Now, the Marina do distinguish between prostitution and marriage. Right? They do not view this as a form of prostitution. They do view it as a kind of exchange. They do view it as a sale, but they don't view it as prostitution because for them, prostitution has to do with the degree of the personal versus intimate nature of the relationship, whether it's casual or not, the amount of concern that the people have for one another. Rather, this for them is just something you're supposed to do to express respect, and failure to do so would be disrespectful. You might think it has something to do with patriarchy, but there's other research showing that they've had this practice long before there are any patriarchal attitudes introduced from the French. What if you're at a funeral and there's a bunch of people mourning your dad, and then you find out later, your mother finds that they're not actually there because they care about your dad, because you paid them to mourn. Well, if you're an American, you might be like, that's really weird, and she might be bothered by that. But if you were, say, living in the time of Charles Dickens' England, or if you lived in certain parts of Vietnam or certain parts of China, that would be normal, and failure to do that would show that you're not a diligent son or diligent daughter. But you have to do that to show respect. So I have lots and lots of examples, and I can go through all of them. There's hundreds and hundreds of examples like this. Even, say, buying and selling stuff within a marriage. So I mentioned before that economists think that putting a price on something makes you more honest. It makes you more sincere. You're less likely to BS one another if you have to put a price on what you do. So these two couple, they both got graduate degrees from the University of Michigan Strategic Reasoning Group. They firmly believe in that. And so what they've done with their marriage is they price everything. Apparently they didn't price sex yet. They price everything else. They do things like, hey, when you do the dishes, I'll pay you $50. Well, how about I pay you $60 and you can be big? Right? And the profile, they're very happily married. They have 2 children. They seem to be much more functional than most marriages in the United States. And the reason this works for them is because they're both a certain kind of strategic, economically minded people, and they recognize what the money can do and how it makes the relationship work better. I'm not saying you should go and do this. It's fine if you don't. I don't happen to do this. If I were married to a version of me, I would. But I might. So, I don't think you have to do this, but I don't see anything wrong with it. Right? So it seems okay. But further, think about like all these conventions of what you're supposed to buy and what you're not supposed to buy. So Michael Sandel says you shouldn't. He's horrified that people are giving out money as gifts. He's like, that's so impersonal. You should be giving thoughtful gifts. A thoughtful gift means I know enough about you to know what you like and I go and buy it for you. It turns out in the 1870s through 90s in the United States, Americans didn't think that. They actually thought that giving monetary gifts was just as thoughtful, in fact, more thoughtful than giving so-called thoughtful gifts. Right? It used to be in the United States, like if I gave you money, that showed more concern than if I bought you something that you liked. right? It turns out even right now there are people around, like the Brennan people, they think it's giving cash has no stigma of thoughtlessness. That giving a so-called thoughtful gift carries no additional thoughtfulness with it. So think about, here's the real world. This is like, looking about American conventions. In the United States, you're expected to make your own wedding speech. But nevertheless, it's perfectly permissible to buy birthday presents for other people. It's permissible to buy flowers, and it's permissible to buy dinner on Valentine's Day. These conventions all seem fine. But imagine there's a twin Earth, an Earth very much like ours in almost all respects, but they've switched the conventions around. On twin Earth, you're expected during a wedding, if you're a best man or maid of honor, to buy the most lavish, professionally written speech you can, right? And then deliver that speech. And to failure to do so would be seen as cheap and uncaring and uncouth. You're expected to make birthday presents rather than buy them. You're expected to grow flowers rather than buy them. You might give them away as gifts. And it's expected that you make dinner on Valentine's Day rather than give them away. Now, in our real world, we have actual Michael Sandel saying, some people are buying wedding speeches. Can you believe that? Don't you see how disrespectful and evil that is? But in Twin Earth, there's Twin Harvard. In Twin Harvard, there's Twin Michael Sandel, who just wrote Twin What Money Can't Buy. And in his book, he says, some people write their own wedding speeches. Can you believe that? Don't you see how disrespectful that is? So the point of this example is saying, like, there's just no truth of the matter. Like, either convention is fine. On its face, you could go either way. So there's no fundamentally thing wrong with it, right? The bottom line is that the meaning of money is not woven into the fabric of the universe. It is a contingent factor on how we happen to think about markets. Money for sex doesn't have to signal distance or estrangement. It doesn't among the Brennan people, and it doesn't have to for you either, if you're the right kind of person. Paying mourners for funeral doesn't have to signal disrespect or estrangement. It does among the Dingley or Mount people. Buying a wedding suit doesn't have to. It doesn't in America. At worst, all this stuff is bad manners, and we can put a price on manners. Here's the price I want to put on it. If our manners kill people, then our manners are bad. Right? So at most it looks like not failing to buy organs is just like saying it's bad manners. That's bad. Just do it anyways. Right? So their responses here, I'm not going to go through all the possible responses, but they have a number of responses. They're going to say, no, it is woven into the fabric of the universe, so this is disrespectful. It's essentially disrespectful. But the problem is their arguments to the effect don't really work. So Elizabeth Anderson says, no, because the problem with selling sex is that you're exchanging one kind of thing for a different kind of thing, and that's wrong. And then other people, not me, have said, well, Anderson, that's what you do when you go to work every day. Like, you go to work and deliver philosophy speeches for money. Elizabeth Radin says, well, the problem with prostitution is that the sex is then impersonal and you don't really care about the other person. Well, then your complaint about prostitution is actually that it's casual sex. So then you fit with my thesis. Your problem with prostitution isn't that it's being bought, sex is being bought and sold. Your problem with prostitution is that it's an instance of casual sex where people have sex without caring, without having a proper relationship. So you don't actually have money, it doesn't make a difference here. It's just that it's casual outside of marriage or something. Right? So again, so then you would have to agree with my thesis. Well, if you do it for free, you do it for money, you're saying you can't do it for free. So it doesn't look like any of their arguments work. I'm not going to talk about all the other objections to markets of the limits, but I do want to mention one other big body of objections people make. And this is a case where economists can do a lot of work, and in fact have. People frequently claim that buying and selling stuff doesn't just violate the meaning of stuff, but it corrupts us. It makes us more selfish, it makes us nastier, it makes us meaner and less caring. It turns out there's a wide range of empirical research on this very question. Does being introduced to a market, being exposed to a market, make people more selfish? And the answer is no. In fact, actually, it seems to make us better. So people like Zach and Henrik and Gintis and a number of other economists have gone around the world playing games, experiments where they can test things like your propensity to give unconditionally, your propensity to be kind, your propensity to punish people at your own expense who violate moral norms, your propensity to keep your word, to avoid cheating, avoid lying, and so on. With real money, sometimes even the equivalent of a month's salary at stake. So you get rewarded for being immoral. And what they found is the single biggest cultural predictor that you'll be trusting and trustworthy, fair and kind is the extent to which you come from a market society. People who come from so-called traditional societies or from non-market socialist societies are actually much worse in all these respects. So there's a whole wide range of arguments that people make about why markets corrupt us, and I'm happy to talk about those at great length if you want to, but for what it's worth, the empirical work shows the opposite. They actually seem to make us better. So at the end of the day, the point here is to say, like, people are opposed to commodification. I think at the end of the day, it's the how, not the why. Their actual opposition is the way it's being sold, not what's being sold. So go forth and sell. So with that, I'll take any questions or questions. Yeah, Walter.
You could add to your repertoire that David Friedman told me that his parents, Milton and Rose, also did this thing with him and his sister Janet about buying and selling stuff. So yeah, another example.
All right, good.
I have two other points. One, sort of positive, the other critical.
Okay.
The first, the positive one, well, not so, I'm not sure. What about voluntary slavery?
Yeah.
I've been in trouble with the New York Times about slavery, so I hope there's nobody here from there.
Yeah.
But the scenario is my child has got a dread disease and it'll cost $5 million to save him, and you're a very rich man who's long wanted me to be your slave, and we make a deal. You give me the $5 million, I give it to my child's doctors, and now I go to your plantation and you know, and you start whipping me or whatever because it's in the contract, and I say, oh, assault and battery. So is your view that the voluntary slave contract is legitimate?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm glad you brought that. We talked about it in the introduction, we didn't talk about it here. In the introduction, but we talked about this. It's a nice example of if you can do it for free, you can do it for money. So here's the question. Can you be someone's slave? Like, I mean, obviously if I just go and kidnap you, that's obviously wrong. But what about I just choose to be your slave? Is that wrong? There are good arguments in favor of saying it should be permissible, like it might be beneficial to them. And there are good arguments against it about Kantian dignity and so on. So for the purposes of the book, we remain agnostic about that. We want to say we don't take a stance either way, whether voluntary slavery is permissible. We do want to say, though, is the problem comes down to, can I do it for free? So could I just choose right now for no money? I'm just going to decide to be your slave. You now own me, you can whip me, and whatever you want. Is that wrong for me to do? We say, well, if it's wrong, because you can't do that period, well then you can't do it for money. But if it's permissible, then sure, you should be able to give me money for it. So this is an example of if you're not allowed to do it, period, you can't do it for money. We don't take a stance on whether these things you can do it, period. We don't have to. We just say, but if you could do it, if your view is it's okay for me to give myself away as a slave, then you shouldn't think, but if you get $50,000, suddenly it's evil. The problem is the slavery itself.
You changed the subject somewhat. What you're really now talking about is sadomasochism, about which I have to tell you the joke.
Yeah.
The masochist says to the sadist, beat me, and the sadist says, no. But you really talk about sadomasochism. I'm talking about something slightly different because when I'm your slave or you're my slave, and now I change my mind, I want to leave.
Yeah.
And I can't give you back the $5 million. Should the law force me to stay there, and if I run away, I'm stealing a valuable property of yours?
Yeah.
That would be a little different.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when you just be like, whatever you're considering slavery, imagine a situation with one person. The question for me is it permissible for someone to become another person's slave without the exchange of money, for free? Whatever that concept is. If the answer is yes, then our thesis is if the answer is yes, then you should be able to do it for money. And if the answer is no, then you can't do it for money, but the reason you can't do it for money is you just can't do it at all.
Well,
So then we leave it to other people to answer the question, can you do it at all, period? So then what we're trying to do to people in this argument is say, you're complaining about the market. You're not actually concerned about the market. You're concerned about something else. Your attention, you're complaining about the market, you're misdirecting your moral outrage. You should be looking at this other thing.
I'm glad that we agree on that. There are very few libertarians who do. Apart from me, the only one I've really been able to find is Robert Nozick.
Yeah, and he changed his mind.
Didn't he?
Yeah, that's what he said, when he said that thing that, what was that book he wrote, the not very big Reflections, or it was like a bunch of short essays.
Yeah.
He said I now consider my previous libertarians, it was seriously inadequate. What he meant by that was, well, he meant two things by that. One of them was he gave up his view of voluntary slavery.
He also denied that afterward, but it's hard to pin him down. The criticism I have, and here I've co-authored an article with my colleague John Levendas, and what we say, and John, you can correct me if I'm misconstruing our article, is that there's something deeper in convention. Like if you were to tell those people, Sandel and your other buddies, this, they would still say you're crazy. And the thesis that John and I have is that it's based on hardwiring. We're hardwired biologically, sociobiological from what happened a million years ago, to see intrinsic that markets are evil, and it's not just the convention. So here we have sort of a little distance between us.
Yeah. No, actually, we agree on that too. Yeah. So here's effectively the strategy of the book. We start by taking their arguments. Like, you think this is wrong. Why? Like, it's not just, like, give me a reason why it's wrong. I'm not going to tell you. They've come up with hundreds of arguments about why it's wrong. And then we just take them down one by one, right? Just shoot them in. Then at the end, though, and they do things like, well, no, it really is essentially wrong, because we'll explain why. We shoot down those arguments too. At the end of the book, like part 5 of the book is, hey, we kind of recognize, like, you gotta admit, we just debunked all your arguments, but nevertheless, if you're Siddell, if you're Anderson, or so on, you're probably not convinced. You're probably sitting there thinking, you know, something is fishy about these markets. There's something wrong with them, and I can't quite figure out what it is. And you know, I gave all these arguments for why they're wrong, the arguments don't work. But why is it? So then we say, at this point, we think it's kind of okay to do some psychologizing. And we say, this appears to be a phenomenon that Jonathan Haidt, a prominent psychologist, moral psychologist, and what you call moral dumbfounding. Moral dumbfounding is when, like, you're convinced something's wrong, but you can't give an explanation why. There are all these, like, kind of grotesque cases that he uses to sort of elicit that, where it might be a case where incest occurs, and then people are like, well, why is it wrong? And people give a bunch of reasons which don't apply to the case, but they still feel that it's wrong, they just can't explain it. What we argue is that we basically agree with, like, this sort of Hayekian thesis that we evolved to live in small family clans of 100 members or less, where face-to-face interaction was constant, where there was no real market and everything was shared communally, and we're evolved and are hardwired morally for that. I completely agree with that. And the result of that is that when you then take that kind of person and put them in impersonal market exchanges, they view those as a violation. And then on top of it, we say, you probably agree with this too, there's evidence that what's going on here is it's a disgust reaction. Like when people are, and you can see in the language people use, they say noxious markets. The markets are noxious, they're vile, they're disgusting. They use these visceral terms, and when they say that you shouldn't do it, they use terms like holy and, you know, this is sacred. And it turns out that those kinds of concepts correspond to notions of cleanliness and brain centers that have light up when you think about cleanliness. So it looks like what's going on here is people have disgust reactions to certain markets. I think your evolutionary story of why I think it's got to be right. And then they're just projecting their disgust reactions on the market. So then we have to ask them, do you think disgust is a reliable guide to right and wrong? Now some people say yes, but the people we're arguing with saying they're like, no, we don't like to think that. And ultimately the reason they want to think that is kind of unfair is because they're like, well, we're left liberal, but those are conservative ways of thinking, and we want to be lumped in with conservatives. But nevertheless, it turns out they are quite conservative on these matters. So yeah, I completely agree. Yes?
Could you please explain to us what the difference is between a usual libertarian and a bleeding heart libertarian?
Yeah. Okay, so I think the difference between like a regular libertarian, actually, I guess I have a certain view about classical liberalism, libertarianism, and bleeding heart libertarianism. It goes like this. The main line of classical liberal thought, classical liberal thought being political philosophies that think that the most important fundamental value in explaining a relationship and what counts as justice is freedom. The main thing institutions supposed to do is protect freedom. Right? I think the main line of thinkers have always been sort of welfarists. Like, yeah, freedom matters, and one of the reasons that it matters is because it makes our lives better. It makes people happy. It makes them more likely to have good lives. Promotes their well-being. You know, otherwise, if it didn't, then like the economic case for capitalism would be sort of irrelevant. It's like capitalism makes you rich and live better. Who cares? Because it doesn't matter. It all matters that we're free if we're starving. So I think the main line of classical liberal thought has always had some sort of view that it matters that the market works pretty well. It matters that it delivers good results to most people. And that matters in the justification of the market. When you get to like the mid-20th century, you get some people who call themselves libertarian who say, officially, their official philosophy says that doesn't matter. Officially what they say is, look, I have these very strong, stringent rights to this and that, and nothing can violate that. And even if it turned out that, say, I think this is obviously false, but even if it turned out that Marx was right about capitalism and it immiserated the proletariat and would lead to the mass starvation or whatever, I would still be in favor of markets because socialism violates our rights. Even if, you know, suppose it turned out socialism made everybody happy and wealthy and rich, it doesn't. And suppose it did, and suppose markets immiserated everybody, they don't, but suppose they did, that wouldn't matter for the justification of markets. I'd still be in favor of freedom anyways. So, what I see as being libertarianism is just sort of a return to the less absolutist version of classical liberalism. You say, yeah, the consequences of markets matter. When I think about the institution of private property, it's a set of rules, it's a set of conventions. I mean, I wouldn't say it's purely conventional, but it's a set of rules, and I wonder why should we play along with those rules? I think it matters to the justification of that the rules tend to deliver good results. So if it turned out Marx was right about markets and right about socialism, I wouldn't be in favor of markets anymore. Whereas I guess certain libertarians would still have to say, yes, I'm still in favor of markets, even though the sky falls. So it's really just, a less hard-line version. Yes?
If the organ market was legalized in America, would you think it's like acceptable for speculation to go on in those markets?
Yeah, when you're doing these kinds of things, there's always a question about what's the best form of the market. And one thing, to kind of back away from that a little bit, with this particular topic, what we said to people is, keep in mind, there's a difference between advocating free markets in these things and just markets, period. So you can imagine the view, I think everything, imagine like Murray Rothbard's, this hardcore libertarian, and Jerry Cohen, this prominent Marxist, had 2 genetically engineered children. One of them has the following view, like let's say Murray Cohen, one of their kids, has the following view. Everything can be for sale, not anything, even child pornography, but only on a highly regulated market. So he's in favor of literally commodifying everything, but only if it's highly regulated. And then the other one, let's call him G.A. Rothbard, his view is nothing can be for sale. Even selling pencils is evil. You shouldn't do it. However, you and I have absolute negative rights against interference. If I go to do that, even though I shouldn't, you shouldn't buy it, no one should stop us. So G.A. Rothbard in this example, he thinks it's always wrong to commodify things, but it should always be legal. There should be no regulation of commodification at all. Those positions, no one takes those positions, but they could. So the reason I bring that up is we're saying organ sales are okay, but as far as the book goes, we don't have to take any strong stance on how regulated or unregulated these markets should be. Should there be regulations prohibiting speculation? Officially, I don't take a stance. So that's my official answer. My unofficial answer that's not part of the book is, I think speculation is a good thing. I think futures markets are good things. So I'd be in favor of, unless I had really good reasons, unless it's something that produced really strong positive evidence that in this case, futures markets and speculation and options and short sales and all the other stuff you get in finance is going to lead to like mass death and starvation or whatever. I think by default we should think, let's have a robust market. Now that's just my view on things. Like markets are good, by default you should think that you should have the full market until you're shown otherwise. But officially I don't have to take a stance as far as the book goes. So officially, there's one thing to know about this book is it is the kind of book that like libertarian-minded people are going to like. Because it's like, they tend to like markets. But officially the book doesn't defend libertarianism and it's compatible with you being a really left-wing democratic socialist. Right? It's like, oh yeah, sell things, but only under strict German regulations. Yes?
Can you talk about how gift giving in the 1870s, where money was probably valued more as a gift than just giving a gift, and how that switched and what the forces behind it? You wrote about that. You talked about, as far as Walter talking about the hardwiring of the brain. Has anyone done any fMRI imaging that you know of where they talk about these things and then they see how the brain lights up and which parts of the brain are being activated? My thinking is that it's the ancestral part of the brain, the older part of the brain that's lighting up and being activated for people who have more disgust response than those who have a more market-friendly response. Their parts of the brain that would be lighting up would be the newer parts of the brain.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
So that's actually been done?
Yeah, Jonathan Haidt and stuff like this, Joshua Green, sometimes on markets, sometimes on other stuff, but what they find is just that, like, there's certain reactions that people have, and these reactions are based upon disgust centers. Disgust centers are a more primitive part of the brain. Right? Jonathan Haidt, and sometimes they do use cases like where they're more dumbfounding examples. They do use cases of self. So Jonathan Haidt, this theory might not be correct, but this is his view. He says there's basically 6 moral foundations, which means like moral categories that people evaluate things on. I probably won't remember all of them, but they're like fairness versus unfairness, freedom versus oppression, harm versus like welfare, loyalty versus disloyalty, purity versus like profanity, and one more. Something about like groupish behavior. And what he finds is that people who self-describe as liberal or libertarian only use 3 of those for the most part. They really only use 3 of them. Not surprisingly, left liberals tend to use the fairness one, and libertarians tend to use the freedom versus oppression one. And people who self-describe as conservatives tend to use all 6. And it's interesting, like the ones about sanctity and purity, and the foundation with that, and the ones with belongingness to the group and loyalty and so on, these ones seem to be more related to what might be called lower parts of the brain. Jonathan, like older, more primitive parts of the brain. Now, Jonathan Haidt, though, for what it's worth, he doesn't do what a lot of people do. Like, Josh Green, his view is, having shown you that, aha, you must be utilitarian because I've shown you that it's just a primitive lizard brain saying this is dumb. Jonathan Haidt doesn't say that. He doesn't think that there's any, he thinks that just because it might be an older part of the brain doesn't mean that it's false or fake morality. So he thinks there's a lot to be said for kind of conservative worldviews. And if you read a book of his that explains all this, I recommend you read it. It's called The Righteous Mind. So it's a popular book, it's sold lots of copies. It explains everything I just said in more detail. It's meant to be like a popular write-up of his literature on this. He defends conservatism in this. He said he did this research, he actually became more conservative after, not less. So I'm not saying this to debunk it, but you are right that that's where it's come from. As far as like sociological literature, I don't remember off the top of my head why people switched. It was clear that in the 1870s, like basically in the late 1800s in the U.S., or like after the Civil War and before like the early 1900s, people just thought money showed you care. Like, because you're giving me the power. It's almost like a freedom type thing. Like you're giving me the power to do what I need to do, rather than just buying something you think is valuable. And somehow I don't know why it switched over. I mean, these attitudes vacillate back and forth throughout history. That's one of the Zellers are saying is like, for any particular attitude you think is attached to money or meaning, you can find examples in your own culture where it have the opposite meaning, and you can find examples in another culture right now where it has the opposite meaning. But I honestly don't remember why it switched in the US. Yes?
Okay. So Robin Hanson over at GMU has this theory about futurarchy and this new form of government, and in it he says that we would set up a betting market for policies, and so people would bet on which policies they think would increase the national welfare the most, and by that process we would decide like which to implement. What implications are there to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
It might turn out it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Okay, it's fine. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. Here's like the paper's called "Should We Vote on Values but Bet on Beliefs?" I'm with them on the betting on beliefs part. I just don't want the people to vote on their values because I don't trust them. I think the problem with voting, you've all heard of rational ignorance. The problem with voting is it makes you dumb. You don't incentive to be smart about it. But I like the betting part because now you're putting your money where your mouth is. So I'm all in favor of using for the reasons he's outlined. He convinced me. Making conditional bets on outcomes. It makes us better predictors. It makes it more likely we'll get good policy. Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of doing that instead of what we actually do, which is a system in which we incentivize everyone to be as dumb as possible and ask them their opinion. I think it have to be in favor. Right? And there are certain complaints that people have about these sorts of markets. They worry about whether they can be manipulated and so on. And in principle, they could under certain circumstances. But I think if you read more about these markets, you'll find that it's actually hard to manipulate them at great length. If you want to read a good book about that, actually, it's called Predictocracy. It's another word for it. This book came out recently on this topic, and not just by Hanson, but others. And I think it makes a strong case for it. So, yes, yeah.
You have an underlying assumption of kind of perfect competition, because it seems like, particularly in the analogy of paying my right for services, particularly something like sex, it feels like you have a monopoly. They really go elsewhere. There's hard to set price in that market. And then if you modeled any sort of producer-to-consumer surplus as it relates to that,
Yeah, that's a good question. So, because we ended up like arguing like, oh, well, you're going to have a clean unregulated free market in these things, we end up saying stuff like, whenever people have worries about those sorts of markets, we say, well, then, in principle, you're fine with it, but then you're just going to want whatever kinds of government interventions that say people tend to favor to correct those markets, then you're fine that we have those markets. So, in principle, you're okay. So, we didn't have really taking any stance on whether it has to be perfect competition. In general, I mean, this is sort of an empirical question about how we think about markets. There are some economists who have a view like markets under perfect competition are wonderful, and then anything under perfect competition becomes a market failure, and the government should intervene to fix it. There are other economists who think, well, it'd be great if we're under perfect competition, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily want governments to intervene to fix it when there isn't perfect competition, in part because there might be government failure that makes it worse, and might actually succeed in correcting the deviation from the rate of optimality. I tend to be more like that. But as far as the book goes, I'm neutral. As far as the book goes, I think it's social democrat. I could be like, yeah, this market's okay, but you're right, the government has to heavily regulate areas to prevent these sorts of illicit monetary exchanges where there's exploitation. It has to make sure there's only the non-exploitative kinds of the Yes.
So there's a lot of like Scroogey economists who did work on the inefficiency of gifts. Like money is just more efficient because they know their preferences better than you do. So there's like they try to calculate this huge deadweight loss to like Christmas, and so if that inefficiency, that deadweight loss is so huge for Christmas, should we be rejecting that convention that you have to get money for, that you can't get money for people for Christmas?
Yeah, there is a question of like, what do we do when we give the gifts? You give up, like this is, how many of you have heard the deadweight loss of Christmas idea? Some of you haven't. So the idea here is something like, it's Christmas, I have to buy my mother a gift. I go and buy her something at Macy's, I guess. I send it to her, I pay $45 for it. And she gets it, and she doesn't really like it, it's only worth like $10 to her. And $35 has disappeared into like just to spin a store. Maybe that's not quite right, because there's also what I value, and I value sending a certain signal to my mother about how much I love her. And so basically, she doesn't value the gift very much, but she values the signal perhaps, and I value giving the signal enough that I'm willing to spend the money, my hypothesis. So there's a technical question about whether there's really deadweight loss. Some people dispute that. But I do think it's pretty, I tend to be on the side that it is pretty wasteful. And my wife and I introduced that concept to my wife when we first started dating, and luckily she bought it. So we actually created a convention, like we have a convention, which is, we're gonna do these kind of signaling gifts, but only for small things. Like don't do what her sister the other day, or her brother-in-law, her sister's husband the other day, bought like expensive diamond earrings for the sister. This will be films, I should hear about me saying this. And he spent like $2,000 on the earrings, and she hated them. So that stinks. Where we have a rule that if we're going to get expensive things, like I get a new guitar, or she gets a new camera or something, then we buy it ourselves. So I tend to think we should move towards, it would be a good idea to move towards that, like having a convention where we give small gifts, where we try to figure out, I know you like potato chips, you just have a thing for potato chips. So I got you some Route 11 potato chips from Virginia, you'll like them, but they're cheap, rather than I got your potato factory. It's a good idea to move towards giving gifts of money and having small signals. I think that would be a better system. And it seems like we're doing that. Now we're moving towards gift cards, and I mentioned Alex Tabrick before. You get a conversation with his sister the other day that went like this. It's like, what should I buy for my nephews? And she's like, well, they like video games. Well, should I buy them a video game? No, we don't know which one to get them. So why don't you buy them a gift card to Best Buy? Okay, well, what if he's like, why don't I just give them cash? No, get to Best Buy, because now they're going to buy a video game with it. He's like, well, I'll tell you what, I discovered there's this new kind of gift certificate that you bring it to Best Buy. If they have what you like there, you can use it there. But if you don't like it, it turns out you can use this gift certificate anywhere else. Should I get them that instead? And she said, yes, do that instead. So he said,
there are some market solutions to deadweight loss that come to mind, like Amazon wish lists.
Yeah.
And so you can still, I thought enough to look up what you wanted, and thanks for letting me know what you wanted.
Yeah, that's what we do at weddings, right? We have the registries and so on. Yeah, and those are tricky, of course, because like just this will also be on camera. Just literally like 2 weeks ago, my wife had her birthday, and my parents went and found an old wish list of hers from 10 years ago and bought a bunch of stuff she didn't want. But yeah, you're right. In principle, you can get around this. But for Michael Sandel, he would say, but now you're taking away the thoughtfulness, because it's not me figuring. The point of the signal is I figured out what you wanted and gave it to you, and this is you told me what you wanted and bought it. So he thinks for it to be thoughtful, it has to be I figured it out. It has to be something like I'm gonna give you a real example. Like years ago, I had this girlfriend who's really into her Polish identity, and there was a Polish Barbie, right? And we walked by, she's like, "That's so cool." And then we walked by it, and went back and snuck it, and then gave it to her 6 months later. That's a thoughtful gift. Well, for us it is. For the Brennan people, no big deal. Like it just doesn't count. Yes.
Is that just the statement of people who don't understand the opportunity cost, even if you know that that's what you want, you still take the time to go and get it.
Yeah.
It's like my dad says, if you don't give me a list for Christmas, you just don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what these gift conventions are about is incurring costs upon ourselves to show commitment. Like you think about, I don't have engagement rings, but take a typical engagement ring, right? And now imagine we make diamonds incredibly cheap. Suddenly, like diamonds, they're just diamonds everywhere, just falling out of the sky. Do engagement rings become cheap? What happens instead? What do we do instead? Yeah. Right. Why is that?
Just because it's the idea of it being rare.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be expensive. You just see somebody like, I want you to spend the rest of your life with me. I love you so much. It's kind of cheap. Maybe you're saying, maybe you need it. But if you're like, man, I ordered a 2 months salary on a training to prove it. Well, that's a way, I guess you need it. You know, I mean, we could have a convention instead where like, I want you to marry me and show that I'm gonna cut myself and bleed out 2 pints of blood. That could work. I mean, I like our convention more, we could do that. So that's part of what it's.
They go to court over it if it breaks up.
What's that?
I said it must mean something, because some people go to court over it if it's a fucking engagement.
Yeah.
So you owe me $2,000 now because of whatever.
Yeah, that's true. Part of it was an exchange of funds, and people can sue over it. It's sort of like some sociologists claim that part of it, what happened was back in the day when engagement was first became popular, when premarital sex was strongly prohibited, once you got engaged, you could sort of, this is a direct quote, sample the goods. And the reason it had an expensive thing was because you then lessened the woman's purity, and that was if she broke out the engagement, you compensated her for the expense of the ring. But that could be part of the convention seems to disappear. Apparently that's part of why it was there, like in the past. Not according to me, that's what the sociologist says.
All right, y'all, we're out of time, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you again.